Imagine buying your dream property only to have your peaceful barn invaded by a power-hungry neighbor. This is the story of how I took a stand against an entitled HOA president. Hey everyone, it's Laura here. Today, I'm sharing one of the wildest, most unbelievable experiences I've ever had. I'm talking about the time when an entitled HOA president, yes, I'm talking about someone we'll call HOA Karen, tried to take over my beloved barn for a community party. And let me tell you, I wasn't about to let my sanctuary be hijacked without a fight. I had always dreamed of owning a piece of land where I could truly live on my own terms. 3 years ago, I purchased a charming 5-acre property on the outskirts of a quiet neighborhood called Meadowbrook Estates. The crown jewel of my new home was an old barn, lovingly restored and converted into my personal haven. I used it as my home office and weekend workshop, a place where I could create, innovate, and just enjoy life away from the city's chaos. Initially, living here felt like a dream. The HOA was mostly a formality. I paid my dues on time, maintained the property, and kept to myself. I thought I had struck the perfect balance between enjoying my freedom and being a good neighbor. But things took a turn the moment Patricia Henderson, infamously known around here as Karen, was elected HOA president. From day one, it was clear she had a very strict vision for our little community, one that didn't leave much room for individual quirks. Her first act of tyranny came in the form of a neon pink violation notice taped to my mailbox. The note claimed that my barn was an unauthorized structure that needed immediate inspection for compliance. Now, I had all the paperwork proving that my barn was grandfathered into the property, so I politely emailed Karen the relevant documents. I assumed that would settle things, but no. 3 days later, she showed up at my door, binder in hand, with a look that could curdle milk. "Miss Laura," she said with a clipped tone, "I've reviewed your documentation. While the barn itself might be grandfathered in, your current usage as a home office and workshop doesn't align with the neighborhood's aesthetic guidelines." I stood there, trying to keep my cool as she rattled off her list of supposed infractions. I explained that my barn was hidden well back on my property and wasn't even visible from the main road. But Karen was having none of it. "All structures in Meadowbrook Estates must adhere to our guidelines," she insisted. "I must inspect the interior to ensure compliance." I firmly declined, citing the bylaws that clearly limited the HOA's reach to external appearances only. With a huff and a dramatic swirl of her skirt, Karen left, promising that this wasn't over. Fast forward a few weeks, and the community was buzzing about the annual Meadowbrook Summer Gala. Traditionally held at the community clubhouse, this year the venue was up in the air due to renovations. And guess whose idea it was to solve the problem? HOA Karen. Apparently, she thought my barn was the perfect spot for 130 guests. One ordinary afternoon, as I was deep in my latest design project in the barn, the doorbell rang nonstop. I opened the door, only to find Karen standing there, this time with 3 other board members in matching polos that screamed, "We mean business." "Good news, Miss Laura," Karen began in her usual brisk tone. "The board has decided that your barn will be our official venue for the gala. In return, we'll overlook any minor infractions on your property." I was stunned. "Excuse me?" "My barn is my private workspace," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I can't risk my equipment or disrupt my work." Her eyes narrowed. "Consider this a neighborly gesture," she replied coolly. "Either you let us use your barn, or we will enforce the rules, starting with a slew of violations you won't like." I knew right then that I needed to stand up for myself. I had spent years carefully studying the HOA bylaws and knew my rights inside out. That evening, I contacted Mark Daniels, a friend from college who'd become a real estate attorney specializing in HOA disputes. After reviewing my case, he confirmed my suspicions. The HOA had no legal grounds to force me into handing over my property for their party. Armed with legal advice and a stack of documented evidence, I drafted a firm, professional email to the entire board, declining their request. I attached relevant excerpts from the bylaws that clearly stated that the HOA's jurisdiction didn't extend to my private property's interior use. I warned that any further attempts to harass me would force me to take legal action. But instead of backing down, Karen doubled down. 2 days later, she appeared at my door again, now with an even thicker folder of documents and what she claimed was a revised plot map. According to her, the map showed that my barn was partly on a community easement, a blatant fabrication, as I later discovered. Her tone was condescending as she tried to convince me that the board's decision was final. "I think there's been a misunderstanding, Miss Laura," she said sweetly, though her eyes were icy. "No one's threatening you. We're simply ensuring that community standards are upheld." I calmly repeated my stance: my property is private, and I have the legal right to refuse your request. I've already provided the necessary documentation. Not satisfied with a verbal dismissal, Karen and 2 other board members began making moves to enforce their plan. I soon received an email notifying me of an emergency board meeting resolution, passed without proper notice, yet another attempt to manipulate the rules in their favor. It was all becoming too much, and I knew I had to act fast. On a warm Thursday afternoon, as I was working in my office, I noticed several vehicles parked near my barn through the window. My heart sank when I saw people, clearly affiliated with the HOA, unloading boxes and decorations. They were already setting up for the gala in my barn. I rushed outside, clutching a freshly printed cease and desist letter from Mark. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded as I approached the group. One of the board members, a man named Ken, smirked and said, "We have a unanimous board vote. Laura, we're allowed to use your barn." I held up the cease and desist letter. "You're trespassing on my property. I'm asking you to leave immediately, or I'll have to call the police." Karen, unfazed, took a set of keys from one of the volunteers. To my shock, she produced a key that opened my barn door, a key she had somehow convinced the local handyman to duplicate under false pretenses, claiming it was for emergency access. Before I could react further, Karen and her team entered my barn and began moving my equipment to make space for their event. I stood there, speechless but resolute, as I dialed 911. Within minutes, Officer Rodriguez arrived, a calm, no-nonsense presence who immediately assessed the situation. I explained everything: the fraudulent revised easement, the cease and desist letter, and the blatant violation of my property rights. Officer Rodriguez listened carefully, then approached Karen. After a brief discussion, he declared, "This is a civil matter regarding property boundaries. As it stands, your actions are a violation of private property rights. You must vacate immediately." The tension in the air was palpable as the HOA crew began to pack up their decorations. Many of them looked embarrassed, realizing the gravity of the situation. Karen's face turned red with fury. "This isn't over," she hissed before storming off. The gala was forced to be relocated, ultimately held on a street in the cul-de-sac with all the chaos that entails. The next day, the fallout was significant. The HOA's emergency meeting, now under heavy scrutiny, turned into an airing of grievances. Neighbors, who had been quietly enduring Karen's overreach, finally spoke up. I attended the meeting with Mark by my side, and one by one, residents shared their own stories of harassment and arbitrary rule enforcement. Jim, the HOA treasurer, even apologized for his role, admitting he'd been misled by Karen's manipulations. By the end of the meeting, a vote of no confidence was passed against her. Karen's carefully constructed facade crumbled in front of the community, and she was forced to step down as president. This experience taught me, and hopefully, you too, a few invaluable lessons. Know your rights. It's essential to understand the fine print in your property agreements and HOA bylaws. Knowledge is power, and in my case, it helped me protect my home. Document everything. From the moment I received that neon pink violation notice, I kept detailed records. This documentation was crucial in countering the baseless claims and showing that I was well within my rights. Stand your ground. No one should be bullied into surrendering their property or peace of mind. When faced with overreach, it's important to remain calm, consult professionals, and take decisive action. Community unity matters. I was never alone in this fight. When the neighbors came together to share their stories, it became clear that the problem wasn't just about one person. It was about ensuring fairness and accountability within our community. Looking back, I never imagined that a simple piece of property could become the battleground for such a dramatic showdown. But here we are, and I'm sharing this story not to stir up conflict, but to remind all of us to stay informed, be proactive, and never let entitlement override your rights. So, if you ever find yourself facing an HOA with overzealous rules or an entitled leader trying to dictate your private life, remember my story. Stand firm, know your rights, and don't be afraid to lock your doors if you have to. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if any of you have ever dealt with a similar situation, drop a comment down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more wild story times like this one. Until next time, stay empowered and keep fighting for what's right.